Welcome, everyone. I'm Sylvia Sepulveda from the Faith Formation team at the Episcopal Diocese of Olympia. I'll be your meeting host and projectionist tonight with help from my colleague, Alex Flanagan. I'm so glad you're joining tonight's event, sponsored by Ethnic Ministries Circles of Color and organized by Meaningful Movies offered by the Episcopal Diocese of Olympia. I want to thank the Meaningful Movies Project, a nonprofit organization that assists neighborhoods, groups, and individuals to organize, educate, and advocate using the power of social justice documentary film and relevant conversation to build a positive and meaningful community and a more just and peaceful world. Before we begin our program, I'd like to acknowledge that the Bishop's Office stands on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish, a people who are still here and who continue to honor and bring to light their ancient heritage. I would also like to acknowledge that I live on the unceded ancestral land of the first people of Western Washington, specifically here on Bainbridge Island, the Suquamish and Coast Salish peoples. I honor with gratitude the land itself and these tribes. Thank you for joining tonight's event and for your interest in the film Harvest of Empire. I first saw this a few months ago as a participant in the virtual Latino Ministries competency course, and I, like all the others in the course, was blown away by how well the filmmakers illustrate the loss experienced by folks in their own countries before they even consider the idea of emigrating to the US. As the daughter of an immigrant, my mother is from Guadalajara, Mexico. I think it's helpful to understand how the lives of immigrants begin to unwind in the first place, so that maybe we can help by attending to that original wound at a human level, before we get distracted by the faceless problem of systemic change. I want to welcome and thank our incredible panel who will be offering their insights after the film. Malou Chavez serves as Deputy Director of Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. She has worked as an attorney with NWIRP, representing immigrant survivors of crimes, immigrants seeking to unite and remain with their families, and immigrants defending against deportation. The Reverend Canon Guillen is the Director of Ethnic Ministries and is the Missioner for Latino Hispanic Ministries as part of the presiding bishop staff since 2005. As Director of Ethnic Ministries, he and his colleagues address the issue of immigration and migration and its impact on their respective ministries as they support various initiatives that address those needs. As Missioner, Reverend Canon Anthony supports and collaborates with diocesan border ministries as they attempt to serve those who regularly cross the border, as well as confront the larger issues around immigration with the larger immigration network. And Greg Hope, as Director of the Episcopal Diocese of Olympia Refugee Resettlement Office, has coordinated the church's efforts to welcome refugees with housing, food, clothing, English classes, and jobs since 1985. In addition, he has given special attention to helping refugee entrepreneurs start or strengthen businesses with loans, grants, and training through the New Roots Fund. Volunteers are welcome at the Refugee Resettlement Office and the New Roots Fund. So to start, I just have a few questions for this part of the program. And we're just going to start in alphabetical order. So Malou, and then Anthony, and then Greg. And the first question is, how does this film, The Harvest of Empire, speak to your role and your organization in particular?
Thank you, and thank you, everyone. It's always impactful to watch this film. It definitely is relevant to the work that I do, and it's relevant to my own immigrant experience. So I wanted to connect the film to the work that Northwest Immigrant Rights Project does. We are an immigrant rights organization. We were founded in 1984, as a matter of fact, in response to Central Americans fleeing violence and civil wars. And once in the US, here in Washington State in particular, which is where NERP was founded, they were facing deportation. And so a group of faith-based community members, attorneys, volunteers, interpreters got together and formed what is known, or what was known as, the Joint Legal Task Force. And eventually this became Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, as many other organizations joined together, because the reality at the time, and continues to be the case, is that many more community members were in need of representation in their immigration case. And our work has now, since the 1980s, has now expanded to work with immigrants from across the world. We have clients who from over 160 countries, speaking more than 60 languages. So it went from responding to the need faced by Central American community members to now immigrants from all over the world. And we focus our work with by providing direct legal services and legal assistance. Even if we don't take the case for direct representation, we provide workshops, self-help, legal clinics. In that way, we provide legal assistance. We engage in community education, not only to support the community members who are impacted, but also to help share correct information to service providers, for example, or other attorneys seeking to assist immigrants. And then our third focus area is systemic advocacy, which includes impact litigation, part of our work to defend the rights of immigrants and change the laws and policies that are impacting immigrants across the country. So our work is not only local or statewide here in Washington State. Our work has an impact across the country, given that immigration law is federal law. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
My grandparents were immigrants, and and I lived in Mexico as when I was in my 30s. I was there as a missionary, but I was there illegally. I was there undocumented, I should say. I was on a tourist visa, but spent 4 years serving the church in Mexico. And so I've sort of experienced to some degree sort of both sides of the border. Grew up in Texas, and share some of the stories that were reported in the movie. Because I lost my Spanish because I was spanked as a young boy in the first grade for speaking Spanish on the playground. I decided I didn't want to ever get spanked like that in front of my classmates, so I just lost whatever Spanish I had. In the ministry, as missioner for Latino Hispanic ministry, we are a very fast-growing segment of the Episcopal Church. We are not engaged in advocacy per se or in immigrants' rights, although we collaborate with the Office of Government Relations and with networks and people all over the church that are very passionate about either legal work in terms of advocacy, or in terms of meeting the needs of the people that are in transition. We also have a great relationship with a number of dioceses that have border ministries, and with those border missioners. Most of what we do is we support the church. I mean, we support the immigrant population, and those of us who are sort of descendants of the immigrant population, by providing a spiritual home for those who are seeking solace and a connection with Jesus. We hope that through our ministry, that in the local congregations and in the local with networking with local organizations, that grassroots work, that empowerment is happening, that people are being given a voice to speak, to organize, to partner with organizations like the one Malou has. And so but our primary work is providing spiritual sustenance to the people that come to our door and reach out to people to invite them to the communities of faith.
Greg?
Well, my name's Greg Hope. I'm a Seattleite. I was born in Seattle. I grew up in Seattle. And after graduating from the University of Washington, I was interested in finding work. And the International Rescue Committee hired me, I think, not after interviewing too many candidates. And so I became a case manager, for Laotian case manager that doesn't speak any Laotian, for the local International Rescue Committee. And since then, I can say I've been an observer of refugee resettlement, working for the diocese for, 40 something years now. So I've seen a lot of families come through and, find their way in the country and view it as, mostly positive. But as Juana Diaz, who wrote The Brief and Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, said, refugee resettlement and just, the adjustment of refugees to the country does not need to be the horrific experience. More refugee, he said a more horrific experience than it needs to be. And that struck me as the way we welcome migrants and refugees is sometimes a more horrific experience than it needs to be, or rather more often than it should be. I really like the title of this film. It is the, Harvest of Empire. And that struck me. And of course, this had a focus on Mexico, El Salvador, Dominican Republic, and didn't mention Haiti too much, or maybe I missed that, but Cuba, etc. That this has that name and what the meaning of it has a lot of parallels with the work that I observe. The American actions, mostly military actions, unlike maybe Central America where they're corporate actions a lot of time. In Vietnam, Somalia, Iraq, and most recently Afghanistan have brought migrants to us in the form of refugees, many thousands of migrants. So I think that's definitely a true statement. And what resonated for me in the film was the Cuban refugees. Of course, we don't see many Cuban refugees in Seattle, but I think their experience is pretty much the experience of, in broad strokes, of the Vietnamese and the Somalis, the Iraqis, Afghans, Eastern Europeans, Bhutanese, others. And one aspect of that struck me is that, it's the upper classes that come first. It sort of is, it's kind of like that. And in the most recent Afghan arrivals, it's sophisticated English-speaking SIV, and what we call special immigrant visa refugees that worked with the Americans and had developed technical skills. So these are the ones that showed up first, and now we're seeing others. So there were just aspects of that title that I thought were, just rang true for my work. How is it different? There was the start of the film, it was said, when Americans have accurate facts, they rarely allow injustice to stand. And that was just accepted. I'm not so sure I accept that. I think that, many accurate facts, people can choose to have alternative facts, and it's a worrisome thing. And these guys that do this kind of thing and that created that propaganda to get elected, and anti-immigrant propaganda, just about did us in. So resettlement agencies went from 347 local affiliates nationwide down to just a little over 100. And we got lucky. We got some micro enterprise programs and helping entrepreneurs already here get going. But we would have been one of those if we didn't have these, other things to do. And it's come back, and we're going to see quite a few arrive. That's 125,000 is the ceiling for the coming fiscal year. And there are a lot of Afghans arriving. We've had 75 arrive in the last 3 or 4 weeks, and we're going to see a lot more. So it's a little overwhelming, but still it's all coming back. But, in a sense, our capacity has been diminished, and there's a fear instilled in maybe somebody like me that's seen it all, that these guys that are just anti-immigrant no matter what are gonna come back too. So you always have that fear, and I don't think I saw that so much, at least in the narrative that was the narrative point of view. And it might be there if they redid that altogether. One thing that really struck me is the whole, like, don't you get the part about illegal that seems to come around from Fox News people. And that always strikes me as hollow, coming from where we're at, because these guys are against the legal refugees too. And I never had a ring of truth to me whatsoever. Your final question about what can be done. I mean, I've approached many people that I see that are their names listed here, and they are aware that Afghans are arriving. Like I said, they're coming, and they're going to be coming more and more. And they face. We do not want them to face an horrific experience. We know it's going to be difficult, but we want to welcome them as best we can. So I would ask is maybe groups of people as possible that might want to take on a family, please, we'll give it a chance, and we'll try to help you do it. And of course, individual volunteers, people don't always have to act in groups. They want to come help us with English classes or job search or some of the other things, even micro enterprise development. Somebody's got an MBA and want to come and help me with my truck drivers or something like that, please. We'd be glad to have you teach a seminar on the pitfalls of whatever business sector about. And then just today, we got word that we can, through the King County, that we got a sort of business training class that they're going to fund, and we want to focus on the Latina community in the area. Although I can say I don't have that much experience with it, but I'm going to hire somebody that speaks Spanish, maybe from Mexico, since I hear Mexicans are the dominant group, to help us out with business development. So, if you see those job announcements, I hope to put them out to the diocese that send me clients, please.
Great. Thank you, Greg. I'm going to round back on a couple of those questions to, Malou, you went first last time. So Anthony, the film was released in 2012. What's changed, or what might they have missed that we should know?
Well, there's only so much you can put into a movie. The book is much more comprehensive, and I really highly recommend it. Thank you, Alex, for putting the link there. I really commend the book to you. It's really worth the read. Well, obviously, a lot of things have changed. Not the history. I mean, what the movie, I think, tries to do is to give us a sense of our current situation and how it's been affected and impacted by our involvement, our government, corporate, etc., military, our involvement in Latin America, and that gives us a glimpse. If this is what we've done in Central America and Mexico, and Cuba, what have we done in other parts of the world? So this is just gives us a picture, and it ought to make us really angry. That's one of the things. Every time I watch this, I get extremely angry and I get extremely sad, and it kind of stirs in me a desire to do much more than I do. What's changed is, and even some of those news clips that show, even though again they're a little dated, those feelings are, those are some of the early statements that people were making, 10 years ago. The statements that people are making on the news and some of the politicians are making are much more, exaggerated, much more vile. much more hateful, much more racist, um, and and um, and they're getting more and more traction. So what's changed is that there are more people expressing feelings and thoughts that were not as visible, 10 or 12 years ago. What's changed is some of the data, the figures of the number of people that are here. And one of the things that towards the very end, it mentioned that by 2050, 1/3 of Americans will be Latino. And actually, the new Census Bureau figures estimate that by 2045, 1/3 of America will be Latino. So that number is increasing, and that brings, because people see that. I mean, they see it everywhere they go, and that's bringing more of that knee reaction, that anger, that fear, the hate crimes, and every attempt to vilify us and to expel us. So I think what's changed is that the more American people, more American uh, folks are buying into this anger and this fear, and they're demonstrating it in at the ballot box and so many other ways. So I think that's what we're seeing is that reaction to the reality.
Malou?
Thank you. I agree with what Anthony and Greg said in terms of the conditions and situations for people. And actually, in fact, I believe things got worse for immigrants. That's my opinion since 2012 when this film was made. I also agree that we can add so many countries, so many regions, so many immigrant communities to this list, empire in the entire world, because and we see it with our clients. So the reason why I think that in many ways things got worse, not only for those immigrants who are coming to the US or seeking to come to the US, but many community members here also, it got worse for them. We saw it in 2014, 2012, 2014, where community members were facing what is called the deportation machine. Obviously, it wasn't created then. It's been decades of this work happening, but during the Obama administration, many people were separated from their families and deported at larger numbers than we had seen. But it wasn't because of that administration in particular. It had been, a work in progress. And then we had the Trump administration where, we saw things as mentioned earlier, where not only immigration officers, but also people with racist, white supremacist beliefs were also feeling emboldened to speak up and share their perspective. Anti-immigrant rhetoric that we heard on these news clips that we saw in the film. But during that administration, we saw family separation at the border where kids were taken away, kids in cages, the closing of the borders for asylum seekers, who, by the way, have the right recognized to seek asylum by both international and federal law. And still that happened and continues to happen. Enforcement priorities for anyone who was not a US citizen, with the first executive action that the Trump administration executed, I guess, in 2017. We saw the Muslim ban, we saw, exclusion policies like the public charge changes in family law. And then in the current administration, while some changes, good changes have happened, and we're hopeful for more, but, and as an example, detention continues, detention numbers, and while they decreased because of the COVID-19 situation that we're facing, and because of the closing of the border by the last administration, detention is not a necessary tool for working within the immigration system. It is not needed. And in fact, we know that a high percentage of people who are in deportation proceedings who are not detained show up to their court hearings. So what I was thinking about is that this doesn't just happen right away. There's a practice and the work in progress, and the practice of detention of people, including asylum seekers, actually came about in the 1980s, around the time that this film focuses on, with the Reagan administration. And not just that, but it was written into the Immigration and Naturalization Act of the 1950s, right, 1952. So that's what I'm saying, that it may seem that things are happening in the moment, but it's actually a work in progress that's been going on, that this is a racist, xenophobic, inherently racist immigration system that we live in. Customs Border Protection, ICE, keep getting millions of dollars, right? And one big impact for me was when Mariana's mother said the price is too high. Actually, there is no price for leaving our family, leaving our home. And in fact, Mariana and I went to school together. She's my friend, so it always impacts me because I know her story, and just watching her on this film definitely reminds me of my friends and family who have experienced this. But yeah, a lot has changed, but not for the better.
So, Greg, you spoke to some extent. Was there anything else that you wanted to add about the film and the time span since it was released and now?
I do think that I've heard, and maybe I don't know if it's just an opinion, that more and more migrants from Central America are not being described as migrants. They're being described as refugees, which is probably more true than migrant, just the word migrants. And I think the film, brought some of that out, particularly for El Salvador. I doubt if the strict U.S. definition of refugee is going to apply to these particular individuals, and becoming a refugee is a very difficult process. So there's always that. But I have just noticed that in our lexicon and our descriptions and the way we think about things, they're called refugees these days. I think that's probably a positive development. They might not have been 2012. I don't think I can recall that description.
Right. So, Greg, I'm going to invite you. I think you spoke a little bit about what we can do, but if you want to briefly recap a little bit for this last question. So this screening is sponsored by the Ethnic Ministry Circles of Color here in the Diocese of Olympia, a religious organization. How do you invite us as individual believers and as a church to respond to the immigrant community?
Well, I think it's very much a human response to respond to the situations that we have to offer people. These are newcomers that often don't really know what they're getting into entirely. We as an organization, deal with a lot of people. We have particular things we've got to get done. We have to find a house. We have to set them up in English classes. We have to help people find work, because if they don't find a work, they're not going to be able to pay for their rent for their house, or a circle like that. We really concentrate on all that. And we like people that can, as groups or individuals, can help us with those tasks. But more importantly, people don't have that big of social networks, maybe particularly within, like Afghans come, they may have a social network with Afghans, but, it's very helpful to have social networks outside of that, or just have a sense that you are welcome. And individuals that aren't going to lose it and maybe give them all their money, or spend too much time away from their family to be with refugees, something, people that are balanced and thoughtful and want to make, sort of friends in a sense that, or helpers that in ways that we can't as case managers and workers. We welcome all of that. We think it's very much a positive thing to have happen.
Great. Malou, what do you think? As individual and believers, as a church, what can we do? What do you invite us to do?
Thank you. I was on a panel recently with one of our colleagues from La Resistencia. You might be familiar with the group against detention. And her name is Wendy, and she said, remember, we're all human. So I'll expand on that concept. And just as we have needs, the people we are seeing come, or the immigrants that we are in particular talking about, have similar needs. So as Greg mentions, the welcoming aspect of humanity, I think it will be important. And just thinking about the collective, if someone's not good, I'm not good. If they're good, I'm good. I know this is a concept other people have talked about, but to think about where someone is coming, what is their situation, what are their experiences, and also going back to the film, think about what is the role of the U.S. in the country where someone is coming from. So for example, I think Greg mentioned Haiti. We're seeing the situation of Haitian immigrants at the border and the exclusion of mostly men who are having to leave countries. Right now, families are being let in, but men alone are stopped from entering, and they happen to be Black and they happen to be from Haiti. But what is the role of the U.S. in Haiti? Since the early 1900s, right? So the occupation, the conquest, and the control, including the fiscal control of Haiti. So there's, just thinking about the roots of why the situation is how it is. But sharing information, learning more, getting connected with organizations who are doing great work, community members who are impacted community members still doing the work. Right now, there's a potential for change in Congress, and it's not about is the administration Democratic or Republican, because we've seen good and bad from both sides. I think it's remembering that we could do better and continue to advocate for our community members, everyone. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Malou. Anthony, how are we called, or how would you invite us as individual believers and as a church to respond to the immigrant community?
First of all, I would encourage people to get connected to the two agencies in the Episcopal Church that deal with this. One is EMM, Episcopal Migration Ministries. Their webpage and their Facebook page are full of information about the current crisis, especially with Afghanistan. They have resources. They have pleas for how we can get engaged. The other is Episcopal Public Policy Network. I hope that every Episcopalian, joins that network. The Office of Government Relations sends through that network information about bills on the Hill, how we can take action, who we can call, who we can write to. So I think both of those agencies are two ways that the Episcopal Church can be engaged. In terms of the Latinos, there was a conference. In fact, Paul Moore has been involved in, I believe he initiated it some years ago, the Border Ministry Summit, and it was canceled. It was scheduled for this fall, but it's been canceled or postponed until next year. But that's something that that has to do specifically with the crisis at the border, and so that is an event that is that I would encourage people to participate in. My office is holding a Borderlands virtual experience in November, and that is will allow people to visit various border ministries, and so that the church can be aware of, again, hear from the people who are being affected and how the church is responding to those needs. There'll be a small fee for that, but it's a 2-day conference that I recommend people to participate in.
Anthony, when does registration for that open, by the way?
We have not sent that out, and I would imagine that we'll send that out at the end of the month.
Okay, good.
We're a little behind on that. So those are some of the things that I can think of that, if you're interested in wanting to do more. And also there are the Diocese of West Texas, the Diocese of the Rio Grande, the Diocese of Arizona, and the Diocese of San Diego all have some sort of a border missioner or somebody that's involved with reaching out. And so those are dioceses that people can get engaged with and connected with.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, panel, for those great answers. And so we're going to open this to the community now.
I really appreciated Malou's discussion of how white supremacy has worked so negatively in this arena. And I appreciate her mentioning the Haitian refugees as well. And thank you for all this work. It's very important work that you're doing.
Thank you, Aisha. Rachel?
Thank you. I was just curious if the book had come out a while ago. Is there by any chance a book study resource that one could use as to kind of walk people through it?
I'm not familiar with one, but I've not looked for it. That's a really good question.
I did look for a study guide for the film and I didn't see one. So it's possible there's one for the book and I can take a look, but I know there isn't one for the film that I know of.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, I think it would be a great book study.
Yeah, I think you're right. Absolutely. Anyone
Anyway,
else?
I've just ordered it.
Oh, good.
I saw that Ruth, you had your hand up before. Do you have a question or thought?
It's more a comment. I think I'm older than most of you. I remember the weekend that Castro came down out of the mountains. I was living in Florida at the time of the Mariel boat lift. I had never put all of the immigrant situation together mentally until I saw this film. So I have a great deal to think about. And I have volunteered to be English as a second language teacher with the Afghan refugees. So
Great, thank you.
anyway, this was well worth the effort on everyone's part.
Thank you, Ruth.
I'd like to.
Oh, I think I saw Kathy's hand up, and then Tammy. Would that be okay? Kathy A.
Hi, yes, thank you. I'd like to ask the panel, with your reference to the decline in welcoming conditions for immigrants in our country over the past 10 years or more, what are your ideas for our best way as Christian people to act against that tide? You know, I have ideas like the more we can show our solidarity and our love and acceptance for the people coming to us, that can have a kind of a rubbing off effect on the people around us. The more that we can be positive and generate that positive direction. What I'd like to hear from you all, because of your, you know, your intimate involvement with people coming to us. What do you think would be most helpful in helping our brothers and sisters here to come to a change of heart?
I can start. I think that often putting a face to the issue helps move hearts, and you know, hopefully, as you mentioned, Kathy, standing in solidarity and reminding others why this is the way to go, or the right, you know, choosing the path, as you mentioned. I think that there's a lot that happens, that Congress has a lot of power. So continuing to, as Anthony mentioned, like be aware of the bills that are coming, pushing against, challenging them. And also continuing when we do challenge bills or challenge systems, continuing to say, it's not that we don't welcome immigrants, or for example, the Afghan community, is not that we're not welcoming them, or even, not sure if you are familiar, but one example, there's something now called a dedicated docket, where is expedited deportation processing for people who arrived after a certain date, who have 300 days for their case to be adjudicated in immigration court. And one thing that the government has sought to do is provide funding to an organization. Seattle is one of the 11 cities where this program is happening. And they wanted to provide funding, but the funding did not include advice. So it would serve almost as a mechanism to assist with the fast processing, right? As opposed to due process and given advice. So while we challenge that, we also reminded them it's not that we're not welcoming, it's not that we're not standing with immigrants. It's just what you're suggesting will not be something that we would stand for. So yeah, it's challenging, continuing to stand in solidarity.
I'm sorry, continuing to what?
Stand in solidarity.
Stand in solidarity. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Tammy, I think you had your hand up.
I did, thank you. I want to thank you for this. I'm a 61-year-old college student in the second to the last quarter in social and human services. And for my practicum, my supervisor actually registered or asked me to register for this because I'm doing diversity, a little bit of diversity training. And right now I'm taking a class on racialized trauma. And it doesn't touch a lot on Latinos, like Latin America, Central America, or any of that. And this really, like I think Ruth said, it fleshes out and expands our knowledge of that. So I appreciate that. But in the community that you're talking about, are there mental health services available for people that went through this kind of trauma? And I mean, is that offered through any social service agencies that you can think of? Because I don't actually know the answer to that question.
There are, but they're inadequate. So you're entering into a field that could use some help, I'm sure. And I think I'm not speaking out of turn for that. There are Asian Counseling Referral Service. There's some mental health work done at Harborview Hospital for refugees and immigrants. there's been some surveys by the health screening department in King County, which is, not done in other places in the nation, where there's a sort of mental health survey during the refugee and required health screening, and a third, in the diagnosis they can find at least 1/3 or have post-traumatic stress disorder when they just first arrive here. My experience is that most, because of the situation they're in, and they understand pretty quickly that, they gotta deal with it well. And I think they lay that kind of thing aside. It's gonna come out later, it does. Sometimes it's past the time where our services are being provided. But, I don't see how people and the experiences that I've heard about and observed, people talking about, can come out of that without some mental health problem. It's like war or a lot of things. So,
Sure. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yeah, I was just curious because we are specifically studying that right now, and it didn't occur to me that people like who we watch today are African Americans or Asians or anyone who's, once they get out of their homeland, then they're racially profiled here a lot of the time. And so I was thinking, I wonder if there's, anything like that available for recent refugees. That's really all.
Yeah, it's available, but there's many, it's not picked up, and I think the resources are considered thin when compared to the problem.
Okay, well, I appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Tammy. And I think Paul made a good comment in the chat about cultural barriers sometimes standing in the way. And I think part of standing in solidarity, and I can speak for myself, is to work with as many people as possible on anti-racism to make the environment more friendly, so people can enter a healing place instead of battling again in a different way once they get here. Any other questions or comments? Rachel.
Yeah, I just wanted to share a real interesting thing from the chat, and it's conversation a little bit with Anthony here. I asked if the School for Americas is still a thing, that we were still training people to go off and do these things. And Anthony said, well, there was a name change to the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation. And so I just kind of quickly Googled that, and they were still teaching courses as of 2015. So, this is ongoing, and that's not something I had any awareness of at all. And I appreciate learning about it. And now I'm appalled. But it gives another place to kind of turn and be able to say, this should not exist anymore. This needs to go away. But it does look like various countries are not sending people there anymore for training. But we need to encourage that. Thank you.
Yeah, good point. Thank you.
I also had a question about if the U.S. has ever received incurred any kind of censoring because of any of its activity. Does anyone know about that?
Can you ask that question again?
Well, in the movie, there was a reference to, I believe it was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, sort of, kind of handing down a statement at one point. But I'm wondering if we've ever, as an empire on the world stage, incurred any kind of official censure.
No, because I think that the big countries stay out of the world court and all kinds of things. And, the internet, well, I don't know for sure, but you hear the international law is just not as strong as you would need it to be to censure censor the United States for anything. And we don't participate in the world court and some of those bodies that do that. Maybe others can say more to that point. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there was a recent article in the New Yorker that talked about the attorneys that fought for some civil rights, and the idea that when countries competing against us, like Russia, kind of put pressure on our civil rights and we put pressure on theirs, that improves the lot for those who need civil rights fought for. So in a way, it's more peer pressure than court pressure, because, like Greg said, we're not fighting at that level, but it's ironically helpful that the Russians criticize us when we have poor civil rights in this country.
Yeah. There was one question earlier about, making a better environment. And, David Brooks wasn't at his best in this movie where he was talking about criminals crossing the border and so forth. But he did have an article or an opinion piece this morning about, not thinking of ourselves so much as a superpower or the greatest and so forth anymore, but having a little more humility as being the dominant sort of sense of who we are, a country with humility. I don't know. That seems pretty good to me. And maybe younger people are picking up on that. I don't know. Mm-hmm.
Anyone else?
Just sort of responding to you said Keisha. One of the things that I'm aware of in terms of just getting information and news is that much of what we watch, what we see on various news channels, is really so U.S. centric, and we just don't get information about what's going on in Latin America. One of the things that I read is there's an app, BBC Latino. You can get that in Spanish and English. And so there's, BBC has reporters all over the place, and you can actually just get news about what's happening in the various countries in Latin America that you're not going to get in most of your mainline either news, TV news or newspapers. Another resource is Axios, AXIOS, and they put out a weekly sort of news brief on news around Latin America and the U.S. that are related to Latinos, and I would encourage you to sort of consider those things.
Great, thank you. All right, so it sounds like everyone has kind of commented, and we've got some great insight from our panelists. So I will say that we'll have a post-screening blog post that will get emailed to everybody, and we'll pick up the links from the panelists that they want to share with all of you, and also some actions moving forward if you are interested in doing some work on behalf of the immigrants in your community. We'll have some actions that you can help with. So if there's nothing else at this point, I just want to thank everyone who was able to join tonight, and I want to thank our wonderful panelists, Reverend Canon Anthony Guillen, Greg Hope, and Malou Chavez. Special thanks to Alex for assisting tonight. This screening and this conversation is an example of how you can use the Meaningful Movies Project with your church or your group or a combination of groups. If you have a subject that you want to explore like this, let me know and I can help you organize a screening. Before we leave, I'd like to ask Anthony to give a closing prayer or to dismiss us in prayer.
Sure, thank you. Lord Jesus, we come to you this evening with heavy hearts, disturbed, perhaps angry at the realization of the way that our country has affected the lives and livelihood and soul of so many people around the world, especially in Latin America. We ask you, Lord, that you would move us from those feelings to praxis, to action, to doing whatever it is that we can in our place, in our setting, to open other people's eyes to our abuses, to make, to change laws, to change attitudes, to provide a welcome, and especially a welcome, a true welcome to those who are already here, working in so many areas, providing for us, caring for us, raising our food, caring for our children, mowing our lawns, that we might do whatever we can to provide them sustenance and support and encouragement and healing of the trauma that they've experienced. Be with us this night, O Lord, and help us to rest in peace. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Sylvia. Great job.
Oh, thank you so much, all of you, for being an amazing panel. Really appreciate it.